Hi, my name is Paul Jackson, a senior lecturer in history at the University of Northampton. And because we can't run our usual Discovery Day activities due to the coronavirus restrictions, I made this film to tell people about a history course that I teach at the university called Movements and Regimes, a History of Fascism. I've been teaching this course for around 10 years now, trying to keep students up to date with some of the latest literature in and around the history of fascism. And in an era where nationalism and online hate are both very much on the rise, it's never felt more timely to discuss with students the history of fascism and the wider extreme right. The module begins by thinking about what fascism is, how to define fascism, and looks at the birth of fascism in Italy. We see that the appeal of fascism was simple. If you loved your country more than anything else, and would do anything to help it reach its supposed past glory, then fascism would allow you to take part in a big project to try and achieve this end. The cost, though, was individual liberty, multi-party politics, and the right to disagree with the state. But this was a price many were prepared to pay for the promise of a reborn Italy. In Germany, Hitler's Nazi Party developed a form of fascism along broadly similar lines, but here fascism was different and was steeped in a particularly extreme form of anti-Semitism and anti-liberal nationalism. Jewish people were seen by Hitler and other German fascists as an existential threat to Germany, and so the fascist cause here became a battle of good and evil, ultimately justifying genocide during the Second World War. The module starts by exploring these two really important examples of fascism in power, but it's much more than that, and a real tour around the many fascist movements that had developed in Europe and elsewhere before and after the Second World War. We look at fascist movements in Spain, in France, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in Hungary, and in Croatia as well, which engaged in its own acts of genocide during the Second World War. We also look at the fascist movement, the Legion of the Archangel Michael in Romania, another case study that students find particularly interesting. Fascism didn't end after the Second World War, at least according to some of the most recent historians of fascism, so the module examines how, after 1945, though in much more marginalised form, many new types of fascism emerged too. In many ways, these ostracised forms of fascism on the margins of the society are its normal state in modern societies. Italy and Germany were the rare exceptions. There were new political parties that tried to rekindle fascism, and some were relatively successful from the 1940s onwards, such as the Italian social movement. In France, the Front National under Jean-Marie Le Pen developed from fascist networks at the end of the 1960s and into the early 1970s, but it soon moderated its image, inspiring many of the populist parties we see in Europe today. Then in the last few weeks, the module turns to fascism in Britain and America. And here we're very lucky to be able to use primary source material from a unique collection that we have at the University of Northampton, something called the Searchlight Archive. Searchlight is an anti-fascist campaigning organisation that's been active since the 1960s. Over the years, Searchlight has collected through its activities a vast array of magazines, posters, stickers, and internal bulletins, and lots of other material linked to many fascist and far-right groups in Britain and internationally. A few years ago, they brought their collection to the university so we could turn it into a research archive used by journalists and many academic researchers. We now also use this material in our teaching, including for my History of Fascism module. This allows students to interact with real copies of fascist magazines and other literature. For example, we look at groups like the American Nazi Party, a key American neo-Nazi group of the 1960s. Its highly racist magazine, Stormtrooper, was designed to be accessible and was targeted to younger activists coming of age in the era of the civil rights movement, with many cartoons and images demonising people of colour in particular. When its leader, George Lincoln Rockwell, was killed in 1967, he became a martyr for the wider movement and is still worshipped by some today. We also look at the ways in which fascism in America took a new turn in the 2000s, when a new generation of white supremacists coined the term alt-right and latched onto Donald Trump's presidential campaign to try and develop a relevancy for themselves. Again, some of these people echoed Rockwell's American Nazi Party's language and turned to him for inspiration. As well as fascism in America, past and present, we look at fascism in Britain, and this includes Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists, as well as lots of other small fascist groups of the interwar period. We also have material related to more recent groups in Britain, such as the National Front and the British National Party. Students again get to handle lots of physical examples of magazines and other fascist literature produced by this group, and we can discuss how these fascists talked about their ideas and how they tried to make their movements relevant by latching onto issues of the day. We know from research that we've carried out with our students that looking at these primary source materials helps them connect with the subject matter and really makes the topic come alive. And this feeds into the module's main conclusions, which are that history is not just about understanding the past, but using an understanding of the past to help interpret the present day as well. We conclude and see that fascist subcultures now operate in many ways today as intellectual gatherings, as racist music networks, as online discussion boards, and as clandestine groups. They inform online hate campaigns, target MPs, and even inspire acts of terrorism. So by the end of the module, we know that whilst fascism perhaps isn't so visible as today as it once was, and whilst it's not likely to come to power anytime soon in the ways that it did in the interwar years, fascists remain a potent threat within modern democracies and operate in a number of ways. If you want to find out more about how we teach the history and current dynamics of fascism at the University of Northampton, then please do get in touch with us to find out more.